Look, if you've read any sort of entrepreneurial book or any sort of business guru or any sort of video, if you've ever watched a video on YouTube or anything like that, you're going to hear this phrase over and over and over again. In fact, you can't read one or two books before you hear it again. Can't watch two or three videos before you hear it again. And it's this phrase: bet on yourself. Three simple words that basically make it seem as if you just do these things and all of a sudden everything turns out well. Why did Steve Jobs succeed? Because he bet on himself. Why did George Washington succeed? Because he bet on himself. Why did Caesar succeed? Because he bet on himself. Why did Harriet Tubman succeed? Because she bet on herself. You hear this idea of betting on yourself over and over and over again, and I think I get what people are trying to say. It's all about courage. It's about being able to say, hey, I think I've got what it takes to get the thing done, and I'm going to not bet on other people. I'm going to bet on myself, and I'm going to make it happen with my own effort and my own energy. That's great. But what happens if you take this idea beyond where people typically stop? Where people typically stop at, yeah, if I just take the risk and bet on myself, it'll all turn great. What if you take another step forward and you look at what happens to a lot of people after you bet on yourself? What you'll find is it doesn't always end well. In fact, oftentimes it doesn't end well at all. There's a difference between betting on yourself in a way that's wise and then betting on yourself in a way that's dangerous. And today we're going to talk about the difference between the two, because if you're going to bet on yourself, there's certain conditions that have to be present for it to be a wise bet on yourself. We're going to talk about that now. Hey, I'm Dana Owolabi, and welcome back to the Dana Owolabi podcast. Now, before we understand the difference between wise risk and dangerous risk, you've got to understand the value of a risk. There are moments in your leadership journey as an executive, as an owner, as an entrepreneur, heck, if you're a Christian, as a Christian, where you're going to have to take risks, where it's absolutely necessary to take a leap before you're ready. This is something that comes in the lives of every great leader. You think Martin Luther King, you think George Washington, you think Abraham Lincoln, all of them had to do things that they had never done before, that they realized as they were stepping into this new chapter that they didn't have all the experience they wanted. They didn't have all the information they wanted. They didn't have all the resources they wanted. They were doing things for the first time. Like when Martin Luther King started leading the Montgomery bus boycott, he had never led a bus boycott before. When Abraham Lincoln started leading the Civil War, he had never led a civil war before. Heck, America had never had a civil war before. When George Washington led the American Revolution, he had never led a revolution before. So these are all situations where people are going into these momentous moments with almost no practical knowledge about how the thing is going to play out. They're taking real risks. But those were wise risks. Why? Well, there's a difference between a foolish risk and a wise risk. There's a difference between courage and recklessness. Here's the difference. Courage is about risk, but it's about sacrifice. It's about commitment. It's about perseverance. It's about truth. It's about determination. It's recognizing that you're going into a situation that's unfamiliar, but you're equipped in a way that has to do with your soul's conviction. You recognize that this is going to be hard and you're willing to go through the hard. You've done everything you can to prepare up to that moment, and you know there's nothing else to do next except to take the risk. You're as ready as you're ever going to be. That's where courage comes in. The moment is now, and you're as ready as you're ever going to be. On the other hand, recklessness is all about unearned knowledge. You think you know something, but you actually haven't done the hard work to learn it. You're going off of enthusiasm. You're going off of other people's hard work, other people's knowledge. You're taking a leap and you're hoping that things work, but you realize that you don't have the inner capacity to get things done. You were just going off of pure hope and a wish without having built the necessary infrastructure to do this over the long haul. Oftentimes, you know it's reckless when you think to yourself, okay, if this takes longer than a couple days, this takes longer than a couple months, this takes longer than a couple years, I'm toast. Well, the truth is, those who have courage, they jump in knowing that this could be very, very, very long and very, very, very hard, and I'm ready, and I'm not going to leave, and I'm going to do it anyway. That's one clear difference between courage and recklessness. But the best leaders, they've all bet on themselves. So how do you know when it's time to bet on yourself? Well, there's 3 clear filters that you can use to recognize when it's time to bet on yourself. I'm going to give you those 3 right now. Number 1 is capacity before confidence. Number 2 is preparation before risk. Number 3 is alignment before sacrifice. Let's walk through all 3 together. The first one is capacity before confidence. One of my favorite quotes is from Shane Parrish. He says this, he says, competence is how good you actually are at something, but confidence is how good you think you are at something. There is this idea that when you're working in something for a long period of time, you actually get good at it. You understand how it works at a deep level. People who are mechanics for decades, they have that knowledge where they've worked on so many engines that when they say, hey, I can fix your car, they actually can fix your car. It's not confidence. It's not hope and a wish. It's actual competence. They know how the machinery works and they understand exactly how to make it work. And so when you have that level of competence, it becomes easier to take a risk. That's why it's important to build capacity. I can actually do the work. I know how hard it is. I know how my fingers feel when I've been doing it for 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 hours. I recognize the difficulty in it. I respect difficulty in it. And so my confidence comes from my competence, not just some sort of pie in the sky. Yeah, I'm a hardworking guy. I think I can get it done. No, you've actually done it and you know how hard it is and you can say it with confidence because you've got competence. The second one is preparation before risk. I love this one because it's similar to the first one, but it has much more to do with you putting the time in. One of my favorite basketball players growing up was Kobe Bryant. And one of the things I loved about Kobe Bryant was that he talked about hitting game-winning shots. Michael Jordan did the same thing too. And when he would make a game-winning shot, he recognized that he had shot that single shot thousands and thousands and thousands of times. So when he went up to shoot, he wasn't surprised when it went in. It wasn't an accident. He wasn't hoping it would go in. He knew exactly when it came off his fingers whether it was going to go in or not because he had shot that exact shot every single time. He wasn't surprised when it went in. He had planned for that. He had worked for that. He had prepared for that. The purpose of preparation is to say, look, I'm going to do everything I possibly can ahead of time leading up to that moment of risk. So when the risk happens, I have a pretty clear idea as to whether or not this is going to happen because I have put the time in. When you've put preparation before risk, what you've done is you've mitigated the risk. You've reduced the risk. You still have to take the risk, but it's a calculated risk. And you recognize, okay, I've done everything I possibly can do. Now it's time to take the shot. Now it's time to take the leap. Now it's time to do the thing I know I need to do. The last one is very similar, but a little bit different. Alignment before sacrifice. When I say alignment before sacrifice, what you've got to understand is it's more than just your effort and it's more than just your preparation. It's you building the systems that are necessary to sustain your sacrifice. When you have alignment, what you've done is you've taken the time to figure out who's in your corner, who's behind you. What happens if this gets really hard? Do I have enough resources? Do I have a place to go get the resources? And you start to align your life around the sacrifice you're about to make. You're not just taking a leap and hoping it works out. You're actually lining up people who can be in your corner when things go hard. You're lining up resources in case this thing doesn't go right away. You're lining up information and knowledge. You're saying, if I need to get more information on this, who am I going to go to? Where am I going to ask? Will I have enough time? You figured out how to align your life around this next step. And then you figured out, okay, if I take this leap and I make a big sacrifice, can I sustain the sacrifice? You've created alignment around it. You've given yourself margin. You've built up your savings. You've talked to your family. You figured out what you need before you take the leap. You get everything aligned and then you take the leap. That's wise. One of the things I love about the Montgomery bus boycott and the risk that Martin Luther King took is that his wife was fully on board. She got what he was doing. She knew it would be hard. He knew it was going to take a year or more. He recognized it was going to take a lot out of him, and he prepared, and he got ready. And he said, this is going to be an unbelievable risk, but it's worth it. And he worked on alignment first before he took the risk. So the key here is to ask yourself clear questions. You feel like you want to bet on yourself? Good. That's important. Every great leader has bet on themselves. 3 questions you've got to ask yourself. There's the alignment question. There's the preparation question. And then there's the capacity question. The alignment question is, who does this serve? And am I ready to suffer for them? Who does this serve, and am I ready to suffer for them? You're thinking to yourself about, if I do this, who does it help? And am I willing to marshal my resources to make sure that I can suffer for these people over a long period of time? Who does this serve, and am I willing to suffer for them? The second question is the preparation question. This is simple. Have I done the work? Have I put in the hard work? Am I ready for this? If I take this shot, do I have a reasonable understanding of how this is going to go and why it might not go right away? Am I ready? Have I prepared myself? And then the third question is the capacity question. Is this bet asking me to operate slightly above my current capacity or way above my current capacity? If you're taking a risk and you've built your capacity and you're taking a leap that's a little bit above your capacity, that's great. If you're doing something that is way beyond your capacity and you have no time to correct or no time to learn, that's not a great bet. You've got to ask yourself those three questions, and making sure that you've got the alignment question right, you've got the preparation question right, and you have the capacity question right. That sets you up to really bet on yourself. And when it comes to betting on yourself, there's also signals that you can see that tell you that you're ready. And then there's also signals that you can see that tell you that you are not ready. This is helpful for you as an executive or an entrepreneur or an owner, or this is helpful for you as you're evaluating somebody else and you're giving them advice as to whether or not they should actually take a risk. Here are the signs that you'll know whether or not somebody is ready. One sign that somebody's ready is that they walk into a risk with optimism, but not naivete. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that they are excited by the opportunity. They recognize it's going to be hard, but if you ask them detailed questions, they have detailed answers. They can tell you how long it might take, if it goes wrong, how much it might cost, how much it's cost other people, how difficult it's going to be. They're excited, but they're not naive. Another sign that somebody's ready is that they're ready for the pain. They've raised their threshold of pain. They can go through long periods of ambiguity. They can go through moments where they don't fully understand how things are all going to come together. They can speak with confidence even though they don't fully understand how it's all going to work out. They can talk about the things that they do know without making up things that they don't know. When they have that high pain threshold, suddenly it means that they can go through long periods of sacrifice and still make it through. When people have raised their pain threshold, it's a huge indicator that they're ready to take the risk. Here's some crazy signals that you are not ready to bet on yourself. If you're more focused on appearing successful than actually being successful. If you're trying to prove somebody wrong, if you've got a Rolodex in your mind of all the people who've wronged you and you're going to do something amazing to make them all eat their words, you are not ready to take a risk. Because it's all about appearing successful than actually being successful. Another signal is if you refuse to test or adjust. You've got plans, but you don't run them by anybody. You don't prototype at all. You just run with the very first idea you have and you don't tell anybody about it. You don't pressure test it. You don't ask a lot of questions. You don't have people ask you questions. You just go straight from the hip and assume it's going to work out. If you're that kind of person or you have that kind of idea and you haven't surrounded yourself with people who can help you think about this idea a little bit more and maybe make sure you have all the details aligned, you're not ready to take the risk. Here's another obvious one. You're not ready to take the risk when you are filled with fear. When you can't find a good reason to move forward, when you can't see the forest for the trees, when you are focused on all the small details and everything that could go wrong, and you're unable to see how this all might go right, you're not ready. You've got to be able to see the horizon. You got to be able to understand that, okay, I might go through some tough times, but it could turn out well if I do things right. When you can do that, then you're ready. But you're filled with unbelievable fear, you're not ready. This is why I love betting on yourself. The people who do bet on themselves, the ones that succeed, I work with a lot of them in branches. We love working with owners, entrepreneurs, and executives. And one of the things that we teach within branches is this idea that you got to have a couple things lined up before you take a risk and bet on yourself. And they all have to do with the inside. These are 3 key tips that we teach people, and I think are going to be really helpful for you. Number 1, you have to work on your inner life. You have to work on your ability to deal with challenging situations. That means thinking about your self-talk. That's the books that you read. That's the way you think about yourself. If you're a Christian, that's your prayer life and you thinking specifically about whether God brought you to this moment or not, whether he's going to bring you through this moment or not. Oftentimes when you go through difficult seasons, because you bet on yourself, things get harder before they get easier. And your inner life, the condition of your soul, will help you sustain those difficult moments because you'll believe that you're there for a reason. And regardless of how this turns out, it's going to turn out for good. You've got to make sure your inner life is ready to handle the pressure that's going to come in your outer life. The second thing you've got to work on is your inner circle. I love inner circles because it has everything to do with the people that you surround yourself with, the people who recognize you're taking a risk and they need to be there to support you. They're there to give you some direction and correction, sure, but they're there to give you support more than anything. They know that life is hard and you're going to need some encouragement from people around you. They'll give you perspective, absolutely. They'll give you encouragement far more often. By surrounding yourself with people who are smart, who are wise, who get what you're going through and are there to support you, that gives you a lot of advantages when you're going through a difficult season. So you got to make sure you have your inner circle right. And finally, you've got to make sure you've got inner structures. You've got to make sure that you're aligned across your organization. If your organization is taking a risk, you got to make sure that your staff is on board, your board is on board, the bank is on board. You got to make sure that everything is lined up. People understand what you're doing and why you're doing it as you're taking a leap. It's really important to have those inner structures ready to go. And the reason why those are so important is because when people get the vision and they understand the risk and they see what's coming, oftentimes they're willing to put a little bit extra in it to make sure that it happens because they believe that it's a calculated risk. It's a wise risk. And the upside is going to be far better than the challenges they're going through. And so when you make time to create alignment in the organization, to create accountability in the organization, and to create ownership in the organization, suddenly those inner structures make the outer risk much easier. Here's the bottom line. You don't want to bet on yourself just to avoid pain. You don't want to bet on yourself just to prove yourself to somebody else. You don't want to bet on yourself just to make it look like you're successful. You want to bet on yourself because you believe this is the direction you need to go. You are ready to go. You've taken the time to develop your inner structures. You make sure that you've looked at all the angles, and then this is the moment that you can take the risk, primarily because there is no moment other than this moment. You've done everything you can up until this moment to be ready for it, and now is the time. If you're a Christian, you recognize that God is with you. The risk is necessary to continue to live out the faith that He's called you to. And ultimately, when you take the risk, regardless of what happens, you're going to swing hard, do the very best you can, and let the chips fall where they may. And you know that this risk is going to turn out well, regardless of whether people recognize you as a success or not.